I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I stood there, holding my phone steady, watching my husband adjust the pillow beneath my sister's head like this was a normal Sunday afternoon. He noticed me first. Not with guilt, just irritation, as if I'd interrupted a meeting. My sister smirked. Actually smirked. "Relax," she said. "You're overreacting." That night, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't cry on the bathroom floor. Instead, I uploaded a short video, no captions, no commentary, directly to his Facebook account. Same password. Same profile photo. Same life. By morning, his boss had seen it. By noon, her husband had seen it. They still thought I was panicking in a corner somewhere. I wasn't. I was changing passwords. Before I explain how this unfolded, take a second, tap like if you've ever stayed quiet to keep peace, and comment where you're listening from. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you? My name is Jordan, and I'm in my early 30s. For most of my married life, I was the dependable one, the woman everyone assumed would endure, adjust, and stay silent. I didn't correct that assumption. In our house, routines mattered more than feelings. Mornings began with schedules, reminders, responsibilities that somehow always landed in my hands. I managed the home, kept track of appointments, remembered birthdays, smoothed over awkward silences. Not because anyone asked me to, but because if I didn't, things fell apart. My husband liked to say we were a team. But teams usually share weight. I carried most of it quietly. Bills were paid on time because I handled them. Family gatherings worked because I coordinated them. His career moved smoothly because I stayed flexible, available, understanding. My sister was around often. Too often, in hindsight. She was treated like someone who needed protecting, fragile, misunderstood, always excused. If she forgot something, it was stress. If she crossed a line, it was intention misunderstood. I learned early that questioning her place in our lives made me look petty. So I didn't. I played my role well. The reasonable wife. The supportive sister. The woman who didn't overreact. When something felt off, I told myself I was imagining it. When discomfort crept in, I labeled it fatigue. Everyone relied on me to be stable, and I made sure I was. What I didn't realize then was how predictable I had become to them. They assumed my silence meant blindness. They assumed my patience meant permission. They assumed my loyalty had no limit. And in that assumption, they stopped being careful. The first signs weren't dramatic. They never are. They arrived as small interruptions in patterns I trusted. My husband started guarding his phone, not urgently, just enough to notice. He'd tilt the screen away, step into another room to take calls, smile faintly at messages he didn't explain. When I asked simple questions, his answers came quickly, too quickly, like they'd been rehearsed for someone else. My sister's behavior shifted too. She lingered longer than usual, found reasons to stay late, volunteered to help with things she'd never cared about before. She laughed at his jokes a second too long. She spoke to me, but often looked past me. Nothing crossed a line that could be named. And that was the problem. At family dinners, they sat closer. At gatherings, conversations paused when I entered the room. Once, I noticed my sister wearing a shirt I'd bought for myself, something she could only have taken from my closet. She brushed it off casually. "You never wear it anyway." Everyone else laughed. I didn't. I began to watch instead of react. I noticed how easily my concerns were dismissed, how quickly the narrative shifted if I questioned anything. "You're overthinking. Don't start. Why are you being like this?" So I stopped being like anything. I said less. I asked fewer questions. I listened. I let patterns repeat because repetition reveals truth faster than confrontation ever could. What they didn't understand was that my silence wasn't confusion anymore. It was calibration. I wasn't trying to catch them. I was letting them get comfortable enough to forget I was paying attention. Once they realized I wasn't questioning anything anymore, their behavior shifted from cautious to careless. My husband stopped pretending to explain his absences. "Work ran late," he'd say, without meeting my eyes. If I nodded, that was enough. My agreement, or what he thought was agreement, gave him permission to simplify his lies. He began coming home later, smelling unfamiliar, distracted even when sitting beside me. My sister grew bolder too. She started speaking to him directly about things that had nothing to do with me. Plans. Inside jokes. Shared irritation at people I'd never complained about. Sometimes she corrected me in my own house, casually, confidently. And when I paused, surprised, she smiled as if I were the one being strange. In public, they were careful. In private, they weren't. That contrast mattered. At a small family gathering, my husband dismissed something I said with a laugh. You wouldn't get it. My sister laughed with him, immediately. It was quick, synchronized, instinctive. No one else noticed. I did. Later, when I brought it up calmly, he sighed. You're imagining things again. She added, why do you always assume the worst? They didn't sound defensive. They sounded certain. Certain that I'd back down. Certain that I'd doubt myself. Certain that I valued peace more than truth. And for a while, I let them believe that. I didn't argue. I didn't demand explanations. I responded the way I always had, measured, reasonable, composed. That consistency reassured them. It made them sloppy. They began leaving gaps in their stories. Small ones. Dates that didn't line up. Messages sent at odd hours. Doors closed too quickly. Familiar spaces feeling occupied even when empty. Dismissal has a side effect most people don't anticipate. It sharpens the person being dismissed. By the time they were fully confident I'd stopped noticing, I had already stopped believing them. What makes betrayal survivable at first is denial, especially when everyone around you helps maintain it. When I pulled back emotionally, it was noticed. Not with concern, but irritation. My husband accused me of being distant. My sister asked why I was so cold lately. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't point it out. Explaining myself had stopped feeling useful. Instead, they reframed me. If I stayed quiet, I was moody. If I took space, I was dramatic. If I asked for clarity, I was insecure. The more composed I remained, the more they pushed. Gaslighting isn't loud, it's repetitive. It wears you down by making you question your own instincts. I found myself replaying conversations late at night, wondering if I'd imagined the tension, if stress had sharpened my suspicions unfairly. They leaned into that doubt. My sister spoke to our mother more often, positioning herself as concerned. My husband started confiding in people I trusted, subtly suggesting I was overwhelmed. Suddenly, sympathy wasn't coming my way, it was being redirected around me. And still, I didn't explode. I maintained routines. I showed up where I was expected. I didn't defend myself against accusations that were never stated directly. That restraint was exhausting, but it protected something important, my credibility. Because when a woman reacts too early, too emotionally, the story changes. It becomes about her tone, not the truth. I felt alone in my own life, surrounded by people who smiled easily while quietly dismantling my reality. But isolation clarified something essential. If they were this confident in rewriting my experience, it meant they believed I had no proof. They believed wrong. And while they mistook my silence for weakness, I was doing the hardest thing possible, holding myself steady long enough to see clearly. The moment everything collapsed came quietly. Not with shouting. Not with confrontation. With paperwork. One afternoon, my husband sat across from me at the dining table, sliding a folder forward like he was doing me a favor. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. He said things like temporary arrangement and less stress for everyone. He suggested space. Suggested I take a break. Suggested this was mutual. My sister wasn't there, but her influence was. I could hear it in the language he used. The concern that wasn't really concern. The certainty that this decision had already been discussed elsewhere. When I didn't react, he looked relieved. Later that week, I realized what had shifted. Family members stopped calling me directly. Invitations came late, if at all. Conversations ended abruptly when I entered rooms. I wasn't being confronted, I was being bypassed. That's when it hit me. They had already decided who I was in this story. The difficult wife. The unstable sister. The woman who couldn't handle things. My husband moved some of his things out. Not dramatically. Just enough to signal finality. My sister checked in once, briefly, to say she hoped I was taking care of myself. Her tone was gentle. Practiced. From the outside, it looked like I'd lost everything, my marriage, my place in the family, my voice in my own narrative. People whispered. Some offered pity. Most offered silence. And I let them. Because explaining would have required revealing too much, too soon. Because collapse, when done quietly, convinces everyone the story is over. That's what they believed. That I was finished. That whatever I knew didn't matter anymore. That whatever I felt would stay private. They mistook my stillness for surrender. And in that mistake, they gave me exactly what I needed. After the shift, life became smaller, but clearer. Without the constant noise of defending myself, I could observe without interruption. I stopped trying to be included and started noticing what happened when I wasn't. My husband's absence created patterns. My sister's presence filled them too easily. I reorganized my days. Not out of sadness, but necessity. I slept earlier. I woke earlier. I documented things I used to ignore, dates, times, inconsistencies. I didn't confront them. I let them repeat themselves. And they did. They assumed I was too tired to pay attention. Too emotionally drained to connect dots. That assumption allowed them to grow careless. Messages were sent without clearing history. Conversations happened in familiar places. Their confidence returned. What they didn't know was that I'd stopped seeking reassurance from anyone else. That shift changed everything. When you no longer need to be believed immediately, you can afford to wait. I gathered what mattered quietly. Not revenge. Not drama. Context. I reviewed shared accounts. I noted digital changes. I observed who spoke to whom and when. I didn't need access to everything, just enough to see how the story was being managed without me. Endurance is often misunderstood as passivity. But it's actually discipline. It requires holding your ground internally while appearing to retreat externally. I didn't cry where they could see. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't try to win anyone back. I stayed steady long enough for the truth to organize itself. And slowly, without realizing it, they started revealing more than they intended. Clarity doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in repetitions. I noticed how my husband always left the house after a call from the same contact, never saved under a name, just a number he didn't bother hiding anymore. I noticed how my sister's visits aligned perfectly with his work trips. I noticed how explanations didn't change, even when circumstances did. The same excuses. The same timelines. The same pauses before answers. Once you see a pattern, you stop questioning yourself. Doubt dissolves, not because you feel stronger, but because the evidence stops requiring interpretation. I stopped wondering if something was happening and started seeing how long it had been happening. There was a moment, small but definitive, when I realized they weren't just betraying me. They were coordinating around me. Decisions were being made in rooms I wasn't invited into. Narratives were being shaped before I ever spoke. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It steadied me. Because coordination leaves trails. Because lies told by more than one person must stay synchronized. And synchronization always fails under time. I went back mentally through months of interactions, and suddenly they aligned. The defensiveness. The shared irritation with me. The ease with which my sister spoke about my marriage like it was already over. They weren't improvising. They were confident. And confidence, when unearned, is reckless. I didn't feel anger then. I felt precision. A quiet understanding that I was no longer inside their game, I was observing it from the outside. From that position, I didn't need confrontation. I needed confirmation. And confirmation, I already had more of than they realized. There was something they never considered. In their rush to manage appearances, they underestimated how much access I still had, not emotionally, but structurally. Shared spaces create shared traces. And while they were focused on secrecy, I was focused on permanence. I had access to the home network. Not intentionally taken, just never changed. Devices stayed connected longer than people realize. Notifications synced briefly before being muted. Cloud backups ran on schedules no one questioned. I didn't hack. I didn't spy. I didn't invade anything that wasn't already shared. I simply stopped ignoring what was visible. One afternoon, while organizing files I'd been asked to transfer months earlier, I noticed a folder synced automatically from a device no longer in the house. Inside it were videos, short, careless, unedited. Not meant for storage. Meant to be temporary. They forgot one thing people always forget when they feel safe. Digital memory is patient. The footage wasn't dramatic. No staged declarations. Just truth, uninterrupted. Familiar spaces. Familiar voices. No faces hidden. No context missing. And timestamps. I didn't watch everything at once. I didn't need to. One clip was enough to confirm what months of patterns already had. The rest was verification, date against date, excuse against evidence. I stored copies somewhere only I controlled. Then I did something unexpected. Nothing. I didn't confront my husband. I didn't warn my sister. I didn't tell a friend. I let them continue. Because the advantage wasn't just proof, it was timing. They believed they were managing the situation. That I was isolated, emotional, uninformed. That belief made them careless. It made them bold. And boldness creates better evidence than suspicion ever could. The truth was already documented. They just didn't know it yet. Once the truth was undeniable, something in me went quiet. Not numb, focused. The constant background noise of self-doubt disappeared. I stopped replaying conversations. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. The need to explain myself, to anyone, evaporated. I wasn't trying to save the marriage anymore. I wasn't trying to preserve family harmony. I wasn't trying to be understood. That release was powerful. For the first time, my decisions weren't shaped by how they might react. They were shaped by what would endure. I thought in timelines, not impulses. Outcomes, not arguments. I noticed how differently I moved through the world. My posture changed. My voice stayed level even when theirs wavered. When my husband spoke, I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, but because I was done negotiating reality. My sister sensed it before she understood it. She asked if I was okay more often. Her concern had an edge now. She was trying to read me. She couldn't. I didn't offer reassurance. I didn't accuse. I remained exactly as I had been, reliable, calm, composed. But the motivation had shifted. I wasn't holding things together anymore. I was letting them play out. Transformation doesn't announce itself. It removes urgency. It creates patience where anger once lived. I understood something essential then. Exposure without preparation is chaos. Exposure with structure is consequence. I wasn't interested in humiliating them emotionally. I was interested in ending the narrative they'd built around me. And that required precision. I didn't act immediately. I organized. First, I secured what was already shared. Passwords that were still joint were changed, quietly, methodically. Not out of spite, but control. Digital access defines modern reality, and I wasn't going to leave mine unmanaged. Then I mapped timelines. Not emotionally, factually. I matched dates from the footage to his supposed work trips. I aligned my sister's visits with his absences. I noted when stories overlapped and when they contradicted each other. Patterns turned into sequences. Sequences turned into clarity. I consulted no one at first. Outside opinions create noise, and I needed silence. I read policies instead, platform rules, privacy boundaries, employment guidelines. What could be shared? What counted as public? What consequences followed visibility? Everything I planned stayed within lines they assumed I wouldn't know existed. I prepared statements I never intended to speak. I wrote them, revised them, and then didn't use them. Words weren't my leverage, context was. I made sure the footage stood alone. No edits that could be questioned. No commentary that could be dismissed as emotional framing. Just truth, placed where it would be seen by the people who mattered most to them. Not revenge. Correction. They were still confident then. My husband talked about moving on. My sister spoke about fresh starts. They believed the story had settled. That belief gave me space. I waited until the timing was clean. Until no one could claim confusion. Until any reaction they had would be theirs alone. Strategic preparation doesn't look dramatic. It looks like waiting longer than feels comfortable. And I waited. Because when you move at the right moment, you don't need to move twice. The moment I chose wasn't private. It had to be familiar. I returned to the same digital space where our life had been curated carefully for years. The place where birthdays were announced, promotions were praised, family photos were proof of stability. The place they still believed I wouldn't disrupt. Facebook. My husband's account was still trusted. Still followed by colleagues, supervisors, extended family. My sister's circle overlapped with his more than they realized. And crucially, her husband was there too. Watching. Unaware. I didn't announce anything. I didn't write a caption explaining pain or betrayal. I didn't preface with emotion. I posted the video exactly as it existed. No edits. No commentary. No accusations. Just truth, placed back into the environment they'd used to build credibility. For a brief window of time, everything was still. The post sat quietly, visible to the same people who'd applauded them days earlier. I didn't stay online to watch reactions. I didn't refresh. I didn't engage. I changed the passwords immediately after. Not just to the account, but to everything connected to it. Email. Recovery access. Cloud sync. By the time my phone began to vibrate, the arena had already shifted. What made it powerful wasn't shock, it was inevitability. They had trusted that space to protect them. They had relied on familiarity to keep them safe. They assumed I wouldn't dare interrupt the version of themselves they'd built so carefully. They were wrong. Because power isn't loud. It's positional. And I had just placed the truth exactly where it couldn't be ignored. They reacted exactly how people do when they believe panic can still fix everything. My husband called first. Then texted. Then called again. The messages shifted quickly, from confusion, to anger, to bargaining. He demanded I take the post down. He insisted it was private, that it was a misunderstanding, that I was ruining things unnecessarily. What he didn't realize was that every reaction he had was happening in real time, in front of people who mattered. He commented publicly before thinking. He tried to explain instead of staying silent. He contradicted himself within minutes. Colleagues asked questions he couldn't answer cleanly. Someone referenced dates he'd already lied about at work. Another pointed out the location in the video, one he'd claimed he'd never been to. My sister reacted differently. She stayed quiet at first. Then she messaged mutual relatives, trying to frame it as a marital issue I'd exaggerated. But silence looks suspicious when evidence is loud. And then the line they never expected was crossed. Her husband commented. Just one sentence. Enough to signal recognition. Enough to confirm identity. After that, everything unraveled. My husband tried to log back in. Failed. My sister tried to control the narrative. Too late. Their overconfidence had trained them to believe they could talk their way out of anything. That explanations could override evidence. That familiarity would protect them. Instead, their words became admissions. Their urgency became confirmation. Their need to respond exposed how little control they actually had. I didn't reply to anyone. I didn't defend myself. I didn't escalate. I didn't correct their mistakes. I let them speak. Because when people panic publicly, they do the work for you. The post had spread. Quietly, intentionally. I didn't amplify it. I didn't comment. I simply let the truth speak for itself. Her husband's response was subtle but immediate. Recognition. Confusion. Shock. My husband's boss saw it, shared it with HR colleagues, whispered in hallways. My sister's friends reached out, confused by what they were seeing. Everything my husband and sister had done in secrecy was now undeniable, documented, and time-stamped. Messages I'd ignored before started flooding in. Questions, accusations, explanations from them, but I remained calm. I didn't defend. I didn't explain. I only observed as the narrative unfolded without me touching it. Digital footprints aligned perfectly with the events. Every absence, every unexplained trip, every little lie had been recorded against them. The audience for their facade had expanded far beyond the walls they trusted. For the first time, they couldn't frame me. They couldn't gaslight. They couldn't redirect blame. Every claim they had relied upon to mask their actions collapsed under the weight of truth. And yet, I said almost nothing. My voice, my comments, my emotions, absent. My silence amplified what they feared most, public accountability. Her husband confronted her privately, but the damage was already social, professional, and irreversible. My husband's reputation at work wavered under scrutiny. Every lie he had told in comfort was now exposed. No dramatic confrontation. No yelling. Just precision. Just documentation. Just consequences administered by reality itself. I changed the final set of passwords that day, not to punish further, but to close any remaining gaps. Control had shifted completely. The architecture of their life, the digital, social, and professional networks they assumed shielded them, was now mine to navigate. And through it all, I remained steady. calm, composed. A witness to my own strategy, watching as justice unfolded in silence. The humiliation, the betrayal, the arrogance, they all led to one thing: inevitable, irreversible accountability. I hadn't needed to shout. I hadn't needed to chase. The evidence, the timing, and their own confidence had done it for me. They had underestimated the quietest person in the room. And that was their greatest mistake. Within hours, the ripple spread. My husband's colleagues confronted him with questions he couldn't answer without contradicting himself. HR documented every concern raised, referencing timestamps, locations, and the video I had posted. His professional credibility, which had once felt untouchable, wavered in ways no apology could repair. My sister's social circle reacted the same way. Her friends, unaware of the behind-the-scenes coordination, began questioning her judgment and loyalty. Her husband, once oblivious, now confronted her with undeniable proof. Embarrassment and disbelief settled over them, publicly and privately. Family gatherings shifted immediately. Conversations became careful. Eyes that had once ignored me now regarded me with a mixture of astonishment and respect. The arrogance that had guided my husband and sister had been replaced by caution and exposure. I said little. Observed quietly. Let them dismantle the carefully constructed illusions they had built, brick by brick. My patience and restraint had amplified the power of truth, and the public acknowledgement of their actions was the final seal of accountability. No shouting. No vengeance. No drama beyond what the facts themselves delivered. I had orchestrated visibility, and visibility had done its work flawlessly. For the first time in months, I felt the equilibrium shift beneath my feet. The balance of power had realigned. And it aligned quietly, logically, and irrevocably. They had built a tower of lies, and I had simply revealed the foundation. After the storm, life settled, but differently. My husband faced professional scrutiny he could not escape. HR implemented policies, colleagues maintained distance, and trust once given freely was now measured cautiously. Socially, he became an example of how unchecked behavior eventually surfaces, consequences unavoidable. My sister confronted personal repercussions. Her relationships, both inside and outside the family, became strained. Friends and relatives questioned her loyalty, her judgment, and her choices. Her husband, armed with undeniable evidence, made it clear that the trust she once commanded was gone. For me, the change was internal as much as external. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need to gloat. The power shift was evident in the silence of others, in the careful glances, in the hesitancy to assume control over what had once been mine. I walked freely through spaces that had previously felt suffocating. My influence was subtle but absolute, rooted in credibility, documentation, and calm authority. The digital record, preserved and unaltered, ensured accountability remained in place. I no longer needed to react to every lie or manipulation, they unraveled on their own. My patience and observation had orchestrated a consequence that was both public and irreversible. No one could claim ignorance. No one could rewrite the timeline. The environment I had once felt trapped within now functioned under principles I had quietly enforced. Justice had been achieved, not through rage, not through aggression, but through precision, restraint, and strategy. The hardest victories are silent. I didn't shout. I didn't demand. I didn't chase recognition. I let truth do the work, and it was more powerful than any confrontation could ever be. Silence had been my shield. Observation, my strategy. Patience, my weapon. Through restraint, I reclaimed my narrative. Through preparation, I ensured consequences were inevitable. Through evidence, I guaranteed permanence. The people who underestimated me, the husband I trusted, the sister I loved, had dismantled themselves without my interference. I learned that dignity is not shown in reaction but in control. That power is not loud, it is precise, patient, and informed. And that revenge, when executed intelligently, doesn't require cruelty. It requires timing, evidence, and the courage to do nothing until the world itself becomes the judge. Walking away wasn't surrender, it was freedom. Freedom from manipulation, betrayal, and expectation. Freedom to exist without explaining, defending, or proving myself. Freedom to watch as the structures built on arrogance and deceit collapsed naturally, beautifully, inevitably. And in that quiet triumph, the lesson became clear: those who underestimate patience and intelligence are doomed to reveal their own truths. I hadn't needed to confront them, to yell, to expose myself emotionally. I had only needed to wait.